The world is being rewritten in code. The world is being rewritten in code. What does that mean? It's absolutely true. If you think about any human being that we're dealing with, any of our users, the percentage of their relationship with you, with me, with our companies, and with the organizations that they are serving or that serve them, the percentage of the relationship is increasingly digital. The world is being rewritten in code. The implications of that are astounding, as we all know. And I think that essentially there are two strategic drivers that are driving everything today. The first is rising expectations. One of our senior vice presidents has said, the last best digital experience that someone had is now their next expected digital experience everywhere. The world is moving towards user experience very, very rapidly. Rising expectations delivered at faster and faster pace. These are the two strategic drivers that we have to solve for today. And as we at IBM, a couple of years ago, started thinking about how we would respond to this, we felt like there was only one way to actually work our way out of this problem. We had to get our old behaviors out of the way, and we had to think about solving problems in very new ways. We've turned very aggressively toward design thinking, and particularly three things to respond to this. First of all, we begin with a focus on user outcomes, not on features and functions. We put the user as our North Star in everything that we do. And the second thing is we do that with empowered, multidisciplinary teams. I think the problems that we're solving today are so complex, they're happening at such rapid pace, that what we found is that actually the biggest inhibitor to delivering something to the marketplace, to delivering something to a user, the biggest inhibitor wasn't the writing of the code, the biggest inhibitor wasn't the designing of an interface, the biggest inhibitor was the speed with which business decisions get made. And if you insert silos or hierarchies or process in the way of making decisions, you will be penalized fiercely in today's world. The only way to speed up decision-making is to gather all of the disciplines that are required to make the decision and to understand the problem together and in real time work through the issue, all with the shared framework of serving the user first, and doing that continuously, restlessly reinventing every solution. This is the framework that we bring to our work today. We begin with a focus on user outcomes, with empowered multidisciplinary teams, and we restlessly reinvent. This is very different from the old way we would do something. We, like almost everybody in the world, would think that the real issue was an issue of features and functions. And we would build tools. And we thought the tool was actually the product. We thought the bicycle was the experience. The experience is what somebody does with the bicycle. And as we started looking at the people that were using our tools, receiving the signals, for example, what we find is that for any given signal, for any given piece of information, in today's world, we have to distribute that information to a number of users simultaneously, all of whom live in very, very different contexts. You can imagine a warfighter on the field an emergency response worker in the field, with somebody back at some operational headquarters and somebody back at some civilian agency, all of whom have to make a decision based on that same piece of information in real time right now. This is a very different world that we live in. We have to understand that delivering the content has got to be done in the context of the actual user's need. And it has to be done to facilitate decision-making in real time today across diverse user sets, almost always in diverse locations. And so what I want to talk about is a framework that helps us do this. To really understand the problem, I think Jason Fried of 37 Signals said it best. He said, good design is about recognizing that the person on the other end has a lot less patience than you do. We have to figure out a way to create and scale empathy. This is the only way that solves both of these problems of speed and rising user expectations. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they said, it's interesting that, wow, IBM, you guys use the word empathy a lot. I thought that was such a soft word. Let me tell you, there's no harder word in the English language than empathy. Really understanding the needs, the desires, the wants, the fears, the hopes of the person receiving that piece of information right then, so that they understand it in the context that they have to understand it in, so that they can make a real-time decision with confidence, and that decision can probably be a good one. That requires a level of understanding of that human being way in excess of what we as technologists typically have thought of as our job. But what we're finding in today's world is that it is the most important aspect of our job. Understanding how to help our users master their profession, master their craft, is in fact our job. The technologies that we use and bring to bear to help that person do that is actually just a byproduct of what our real job is. And so we've developed a mental model that we use at IBM, a mindset that helps us make sure that every one of us, as we're building our tools and delivering our solutions to the world, actually programmatically develops empathy with our users in a very scalable way. And we think it's something that can be used by everybody. We call it IBM design thinking. What you're looking at is something we call, interestingly enough, the loop. The loop has three real elements to it: observing, reflecting, and making. And then reflecting, and then observing, and then reflecting, and then making. This simple mindset is actually all that's needed in order to drastically change how you approach your work when you leave this room. And I want to spend a few minutes walking through these three key elements of observing, reflecting, and making. And not only to talk about these things, which are fairly obvious, but also to tell you how at least we are scaling it across an organization of about 400,000 people and with thousands of business partners around the world for our millions of users. Observing is really just about immersing yourself in your user's world. It's really interesting when you start to get out into the field and you actually start observing how people are actually using a tool. It is almost 100% of the time different from how you imagined they would use that tool. And so we've actually added about, we're in the midst of adding about somewhere around 1,000 to 1,500 art and design school formally trained artists and designers, ethnographers, social scientists, and about a fourth of that population are trained in the field of ethnography. They are independent observers that go out and actually look at how people are using our tool with fresh eyes and with fresh ideas and without the bias, even in many cases, of having spent a lot of time in a particular space. We scale this method of observing by a practice that we call sponsor users. And for us, for all of our products today, all of our product teams go out and actually recruit real people. If we were Nike, these would be our high-performance athletes. The thing about LeBron James and building shoes for LeBron James, absolutely there's a market of one, and there's probably a market of a few hundred in the NBA. But the real insights from using these extreme athletes is that you can scale your learnings across a very broad population of people. If you solve the problem for LeBron, you've probably solved it for everybody who wants to play basketball in the world. In the same way, the sponsor users of our products and solutions and services today are the extreme users that we are targeting in our marketplace. It would be actually getting real people from the field, real people from the Pentagon, real people from different parts of the world to come together to help you figure out what their problem really is and then help you solve that problem with you. They become part of the multidisciplinary product team. These are not beta users. Beta users are way too late in the process, as we all know. Beta users are simply a way to salve our own guilt about what we didn't build. These are people that are intimately involved with the product creation and innovation process, as well as the fabrication of that process and the delivery of it. One of our sponsor users is actually an emergency care deliverer. One of our teams recently sat in cars with policemen to understand how they use their intelligence devices in the cars in real time. Real people with real jobs that actually have a need informing our teams. We've also started doing work around sponsor teams. This is a real new area. Many of you might think about user research as being around personas. Many of you have developed user journey maps, and those are all good things to do. They're valid things, they're scalable things. What we've found in the real world, in the real complex world, is actually personas are an insufficient device. Not only because they typically become cardboard cutouts of real people very quickly, but more importantly, it's not just the user in the world that we all live in, it's the users around the user. It's the dependencies that are created by the use of our tools in the field. If we pick up our smartphone and we make a phone call and the call drops, that's a personal calamity. There's no real dependency there. We can call back, we can use a different device, we can get a hold of them some other way. That's not the way it is in the situations that we're talking about. What happens in our situations is the information from the tool and the information delivered and used in the field is actually in some system of record that is being leveraged in a number of other places as well. And so we've started doing some really interesting research by our user research competency team around team-based personas. And this is just an example. This is an eye chart for you. This is actually a real artifact of one of our sessions. But we start mapping out not the user experience journey, although that is also a part of this work, but what you're looking at here is the first thing we do is simply understand the network of people around the person. In this case, we were actually worried about two of these key roles particularly, in this case the operational commander and the specialist, and you can kind of see them two in the box in the middle. But unless we understand the dependencies that each of them have in their own networks, we won't be able to solve their problem. So this is some really interesting work that we're doing around teams. We have a new concept called team-based personas, and this new type of user research artifact that begins before the user experience journey with understanding the interdependencies across the network. This actually begins to inform the user experience journey maps that we're now creating. Those journey maps now have to account for all of these dependent users, not simply the one using the tool that you're building. The initial results from some of this work are really astounding. By the way, Elvis had something to say about this empathy thing, if you thought it was soft-footed. Before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes. That's all that empathy is. Elvis said it all. Joe South actually wrote it, but Elvis said it best. That's observing. And the way that you scale observing is with this thing called sponsor users. It is a tactical approach to scaling empathy. This reflecting thing is oftentimes hard, and I think that we don't, in today's world, spend enough time reflecting, intentionally reflecting on the research, on the work, on the prototype, on the feedback. We are way too reactive and responsive too fast these days. And so we spend a lot of time in our studios reflecting as a team on the work product, on the data. We actually have a specific tool that we use, like sponsor users, to help us scale this notion of reflection. We call them playbacks. There's a couple of things that happen in big organizations. Big organizations might ultimately report to one person. Let's call that person the president or the CEO. But reporting up to that person are silos. And as much as that person up there says, all your data is my data, so work together, the fact of the matter is that all of those silos are actually measured in very different ways. People are rewarded in very different ways. In addition to these silos, within the silos you have hierarchies. And I will tell you that a hierarchy is like an artificial intelligence. It will take over. It will take over if you let it. The hierarchy was built to make decisions in the old world, but it still wants to make all the decisions in the new world. And somehow we have to cut through that hierarchy, and we have to eliminate those silos in order to reflect and align broad, multidisciplinary teams around the real mission. We obviously preach this a lot. We talk about radical collaboration. We get people together in a room, and boy, it sure works for a short period of time. Bring them in for a workshop, put them in a nice studio, give them a bunch of whiteboards, and it's amazing the collaboration that you get. And the minute that they leave the room, even if they don't forget, they're driven to forget by their silos and hierarchies above and around them. And so we created a thing called playbacks. Playbacks are the antidote to silos and hierarchy. They are safe spaces that are organizationally built to reflect on work and to reflect on the feedback to that work in a non-judgmental way, and in a way where even when a CEO or an SVP or a colonel or a general says something, they're not giving direction, they're simply giving input. And the discussion is about the work, and the facts of the work and the feedback from real people win the argument. Playbacks are a thing that can be called by anybody. They're not like scrums. Scrums are a thing for the execution team to do on a daily or however often basis that they're doing them. Playbacks are held less frequently and are a broader set of stakeholders to get the broader organization aligned around the state of the work and its relationship to completing the mission. In this case, these were a couple of our interns who are presenting to, these are college interns that are presenting. In this case, it was all the way up to our senior vice president, which is one level below our chairman. Mark Twain had something to say about reflection. Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. The last thing is making. Making is really an important part of developing empathy, because observing people in the field, observing their problems, understanding the problem is one aspect, but they also have to understand, and they have to be the ones that validate the actual solution to the problem that you've uncovered. And so we spend a lot of time on prototypes, and we prototype in all levels of fidelity. This is actually one product, starting from an empathy map where the user research started, where we started understanding what a person thinks and feels and sees and does. It moved up through sketches. We encourage everybody to sketch. Engineers, marketers, product managers, and designers. Everybody sketches. Those get resolved into wireframes and ultimately into high-resolution mock-ups, in this case for a digital property. Every single one of these is validated by sponsor users and validated through research and feedback in the field. I can't overstate the importance of prototyping. And finally, we have a scalable way to make things. We call them hills. Hills align our teams around the intended outcomes for users. Once the problem is stated, the solution statement in a non-implementation oriented way is laid out by our hills. I still think the greatest hill ever stated was this one. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal of landing a man on the moon, and this is the wow, and returning him safely to Earth. A who, a what, and a wow. This makes up our hills. Hills are actually one of the most interesting things that we have introduced into our culture. We now have people using hills for every aspect of driving not only product and solution development at IBM, but strategy itself. All of our teams align around 3 and only 3 hills. It's very much like General Patton said, never tell people how to do things, tell them what to accomplish, and they'll surprise you with their ingenuity. It gets right back to that notion of these empowered, multidisciplinary teams. They're given a hill, they're given an objective, and they are empowered to go figure out how to take that hill. Aligning our product teams, aligning our development teams around 3 and only 3 hills at any given time is tremendously prioritizing. We're working with one client now out of our London studio that is completely re-envisioning their entire B2B platform. They're a B2B company in the oils space. Their entire platform. In the past, this would have been a gazillion-dollar project, many, many years, and waterfall. Using design thinking and using hills particularly has not only helped them direct their project level work, it's actually helping them direct the portfolio and how they attack the portfolio of new solutions that they're going to have to build to ultimately realize this entire new platform. All based around intent, not process. This is pervasive. This notion of communicating the intention to teams and letting them figure it out, giving them the mindset and the permission to really develop deep amounts of empathy with our users has changed everything. We spend an inordinate amount of time communicating with our teams across IBM. Our teams spend an inordinate amount of time collaborating with one another all around the world, both in person and digitally. And they come together at various times in our studios to see each other and to make that physical contact that is also so important. When we were early on in our journey, about 3 years ago, and we started introducing these new people, we started introducing these practices, we talked about empathy. And after about 6 months, I noticed that we were still churning. And I sat in on a couple of playbacks, and I would listen to designers and developers and product managers and lawyers and finance people and marketers, all at loggerheads with one another. And they were all talking about their empathy that they had developed with their users. It was almost as if they were comparing their levels of empathy with one another. My empathy is better than your empathy. and they were yelling at each other about how empathic they were. And it was crazy. And I finally realized, and I got on my designers first, but then I realized, I said, it's interesting that you're doing so much design thinking with our users, but you're not doing it with ourselves. So here's the one thing that I've learned about all this empathy thing. It's the one thing I'd like you to take away today. What we've learned at IBM, and what we now talk about when we talk about empathy, is first with ourselves, and then with our users. Our multidisciplinary teams, our empowered multidisciplinary teams, who are putting our users as their North Star, and who are relentlessly innovating, they are the stars of this show. Not just the designers, not just the developers, not just any particular person, but all of them together doing all of those things. That's the basis of IBM design thinking. Thank you guys very much. I think we have a couple of minutes. Chris, you've got a couple of questions maybe, and we'll...
Great, let's give a hand. I appreciate Brother Gilbert's sermon on the power of empathy. I think that's as good of a Sunday sermon as you could possibly get. So you spoke from the perspective of a solution provider, right? Yep. And how a solution provider should view this to provide value to its customers. What should customers be doing in terms of investing in design thinking themselves? How should they be recasting their own workforce so that they can actually engage with solution providers like yourself who are committed to design thinking, to empathetic solution architectures?
Right.
How should they be thinking about their own manpower, their own investment in their own organization?
Sure. Well, first of all, we all have customers. We all have a next level of customer, right? And so use these tactics, use these techniques. IBM Design Thinking is available. It's on the web, ibm.com/design/thinking. You're free to use it. Use it yourselves. Design thinking itself, as I said before, we are using it now to establish strategy, to prioritize work of all kinds. If you constantly prioritize your work, not on the next engine you have to build, but if you constantly prioritize your work based on the real-world understanding of your users, of your customers, your own work will be better. In terms of engaging with us, this is a great API to engage with us as well as a sponsor user. If you want to affect the development and direction of anything we're doing, engage with us as a sponsor user. We're always looking for them. So that's a great way to tactically engage with us, but I think even more powerful would be bringing this approach to then the solutions that you're delivering to your customers, maybe based on some of our stuff and some of other people's stuff.
Great. Yeah. And second, I think we have just time for one more. I was texting with Al DiLeonardo out there. His team provides, they call it the Rapid Feedback Team for the GEOINT Services Initiative at NGA. And we were kind of debating over text, ethnographer versus UI UX designer. How do we think about the different kinds of design literate individuals that we would hire to provide feedback on those solutions in that rapid feedback loop that you talk about?
Great question. A couple of things. To actually take a prototype out in the field and get feedback, all of us can be researchers, but trained ethnographers, especially on that front end, especially on that original research, ethnographers come in more. The interesting thing about design thinking is most people start thinking about it as a way to deliver a product. Right. It's actually about uncovering the problem. The ethnographers are actually used way up front in the process. And then once you get to prototyping, you've kind of uncovered the problem. You're still validating the problem, but you're really now validating the solution to the problem. Everybody can be a part of that. But we have five designer subspecialties that we recruit. Okay. To answer your question. User research, ethnographers is one of them. UX, designers are another. Visual designers, the graphical designer, the one that most people, when they say, give me a designer, that's actually what they're probably asking for, is that visual designer. The industrial designer, if you build hardware devices, an industrial designer would be, is a part of the team. And then finally, the front-end developer, the UI developer, front-end developer, the person that's actually developing the code-based assets, which is separate from the actual UX designer.
Right.
The UX designer would be would be working, especially at those lower fidelity states, with users about the interaction models. The UX designer is going to be the one that really understands the object model of the system underneath it, and the UI designer or the front-end developer would be the one that actually translates that to code.
Excellent. Well, I think we're out of time, so thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much.
Hand.
Thanks.